ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. I'm happy and honored to welcome Dr. Yasmine Jahanmir. She is currently the Assistant Professor of Drama at the American University of Kuwait. She received her PhD in Theater Studies from the University of California, Santa Barbara. And she's also a scholar. You can find her publications in the Drama Review, Woman and Performance, and Theater Topics. She's also a director. She directed five shows at the American University of Kuwait, and she also directed multiple shows in California, New York, and Arizona. Professor Yassi also is going to be talking about theater in the global context, and we will learn what challenges she went through in performing like Western theater in AUK, and also we'd learn like what's the challenge of presenting Western theater in relation to us, the Middle Eastern spectators. With that, please know that the talk is around 40 minutes long, and there's going to be a Q&A afterwards. So hold on to your questions until the talk is over. Please welcome Dr. Yasmine.
This one on? This is on, yeah? Okay.
Hi everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Contemporary Art Platform and Ibrahim for inviting me to speak tonight. It is my honor. Thank you, Hassan, for the generous introduction, and thank you all for spending your Monday night here with me. Okay, so we're going to be talking about doing Western theater in global contexts. So I'm going to be mostly talking about my experiences directing, teaching, and producing theater at the American University of Kuwait. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot because I'm actually co-editing a book on Western theater in global contexts, which I stole the name of this talk from. And what it is, I'm co-editing it with another professor, Jillian Campana at American University in Cairo, and she's taught and directed in Brazil, in India, in Egypt, and it's coming out very soon. In the spring, we're in our final edits right now with Rutledge. And we have contributors that have done Western theater in China, Hong Kong, Oman, Egypt, Chile, India, Brazil, Jordan, South Africa, Madagascar, Tunisia, and Singapore. So it's a really interesting volume on what does Western theater mean? Why do we continue to do it in spite of there being many flourishing local traditions? And what does it do for us as theater historians or people who are interested in theater, actors, etc., if we look at how these Western forms are changed as they move globally, yeah? And some of the chapters, just to show you the kind of interesting thing is, one of them is about a musical theater school in China, and they do scenes from West Side Story Company, any musical you can imagine, and there is this idea that the Western musical is cool, it's hip. I mean, tell any sort of American theater kid that what musicals are cool, they'll be like, yeah, because that's not how it's seen in general. And that they view their older, Beijing opera traditions that exist in China as kind of old-fashioned. So there's a way in which, by participating in American musical theater, there comes with it a sort of global capital, right? A global sort of prestige. I'm trying to think. The example from Madagascar is this play that was written, inspired by French existentialist philosophers like Sartre, and it exploded the play structure in a way that can teach us about neocolonialism and post-colonialism a little bit differently. That's the example from Madagascar. The example in Jordan is an Australian-Jordanian collaboration of puppet theater, and how that puppet theater is a unique venture for looking at ways cultures mix, because you are excluding the actor in a way that they just become shadows on a stage, and allows for different understandings. So that's just some of the examples of things we're looking at. Cool. So why Western theater? Well, there's this presumed dominance of it, that theater was born in Western culture, that at the birth of Western civilization in ancient Greece, theater came along with it, right? And a part of why we think that is because they're one of the first that had these purpose-built amphitheaters, right? They built spaces for theater. They're among the first to build spaces particularly made for theatrical production. Their scripts were written down, and so they got passed down, and we still have them, right? There were festivals, the City Dionysia, right? Festivals made for theater, made for tragedy, made for comedy. In the yearly and biannually, there were these festivals that were just reserved just for theater as an honoring of the god of Dionysus. And then we have Aristotle's Poetics, written in 335 BCE, that codified our understanding of the purpose of theater and the goals of theater and what he felt tragedy and comedy should represent. And that has been passed down as a foundational text of theater. So because of these things, we tend to understand theater from a very Western viewpoint. Okay, but that's not true. Like, that's not the only story, right? So there's an Indian Sanskrit text that was written even earlier than the Poetics that outlines performance and dramatic theory called the Natya Shastra, right? Ancient Egyptians put on passion plays that told the story of the gods from 2500 BCE to 550 BCE, and it depicted the gods. They were moral plays. They also served ritualistic functions like the Greek, but it wasn't written down, and they weren't in purpose-built spaces, right? So we're seeing this bias towards the Western traditions because of it being written down. And finally, there's evidence of the dramatic performance since the beginning of time, almost everywhere, in Africa, Middle East, and Asia, yeah? So that's a part of what this book is doing, and what I'm trying to do is sort of decentralize the Western theatrical form. But then why look at it? Why am I doing it, right? That's the question. So there has been a lot of writing about how Western practitioners have taken non-Western forms. So for example, this is not Brecht, this is Sergei Eisenstein, one of the fathers of modern film. But he's with Mei Lanfeng, who was a Beijing opera star in the 1930s and 40s and traveled worldwide and was a celebrity. Everyone knew her and her performances. And Brecht saw these performances when they traveled to Moscow. So Brecht went and he saw this Chinese opera tradition, and he came up with his theories of alienation based on seeing this tradition. He said, oh wow, she doesn't seem as if she's like really in the role like Stanislavski. It seems as if she's commenting upon it. There's some distance, there's some alienation. How interesting, maybe I can use that, right? And then Peter Brook also has had a few ventures into taking non-Western forms and incorporating them into his work. For example, in the very famous Mahabharata, which was like a 10-hour-long performance that toured all over the world, he took Indian theatrical traditions and put them into Western theater. However, they were often flawed, and they also often came from misunderstandings. These practitioners have had a lot of criticism now that they didn't really understand what they were seeing, that they were just taking it because it looked nice and putting it together, right? And it became a sort of an aesthetic colonization, right? It's like, let's take what we need, and then let's make something out of it, and then it seems like we're hip and cool, but really we're borrowing traditions without paying proper due to the histories of those traditions, right? Cool. Where am I? Okay. So again, why am I doing Western theater in spite of all of this? Well, I think that a reason to look at it and look at how it's done, it's done internationally, right? So we have to look at why it's done internationally. And I think it can help us understand how culture flows globally, right? It's not just a one-way transmission. By looking at how Western theater is done in different locations, we can understand how culture flows across national lines and national boundaries. By looking at how, we can also see how Western dominance is subverted, challenged, or maintained during these processes. So when we talk about the shows that we've done here in Kuwait, maybe we can think about, or I'll open it up to you to see whether, some of this Western tradition has been subverted, challenged, or maintained, yeah? And then tracking or tracing diverse productions of the same play can show how each production does represent some sort of localization and how local communities participate in this increasingly global mediascape. Also, on a personal note, I was hired because of my experience and expertise in Western theater. Many people ask me why I don't do a Kuwaiti play, because there are many other people doing amazing Kuwaiti plays that know much more about the history. That's not my role. And that's not my job. If I went there and I said, I'm gonna do, first of all, I don't have the expertise. And second of all, that's not what I was hired. I was hired to give a Western theater production. And so the reasons why we can talk about are related to a broader educational shift that privileges a Western style of education and teaching as a way into global economies. I think we can talk about that from a neoliberal standpoint, if you have questions on that. But I think that the idea is that fluency in Western form helps in a global business realm. I think that there is this sort of cynical side to it. Okay, so let's talk about the play. So at this point, as many of the actors who have been in these shows are in the audience, I'm going to talk about some of my goals that I have with each production and some of the challenges I faced. But I'm going to also open it up when we talk about results to anyone in the audience who participated, who might want to pipe in, because they also were, I learned from you all, and so to hear what you have to think in terms of how successful these plays were, I'd like to hear it. All right, so West Side Story. Some of the challenges is that there are no Puerto Ricans in AUK that I'm aware of. The musical itself is already somewhat superficial in its depiction of Puerto Ricans and has been criticized very heavily. The movie that was based on the original Broadway production also portrayed stereotypes, and they did a lot of brown face and darkened the skin of the actors, and that's become the iconic image that we're dealing with when we direct. So how do I make it not racist? That was like my biggest question. How can I do this? So my goals were, okay, I'm gonna talk a lot about what was actually going on in the moment and critique the film and critique the portrayals we have, yeah? Then I'm gonna say like, hey, how can we make this personal? How can we make this local? How does it feel for you? And then I did colorblind casting. So sometimes you see it cast so that like darker skinned actors are playing the Puerto Ricans, the sharps, and lighter skinned actors are playing the sort of vaguely American, the Italian, the Irish, the Jewish side, right? I said, forget that, let's just do skin type and race don't match all the time anyway, so let's just have anyone be on any side, yeah, based on the skill of the actors. So a part of providing the West Side Story is so fascinating because of significance. First, it is one of the most influential musicals in American theater musical history because of Jerome Robbins, because of Sondheim, because of Bernstein, the composer, the choreographer, the scorer, the lyricist, right? It's this sort of masterpiece of all the minds of the golden age of musical theater coming together. So it's important. And yet, it's so bad in how it just depicts Puerto Ricanness that these are the two sides. Either you love West Side Story because it's so iconic, or you're like, wow, that's horrible because it's really racist. But also, there are a lot of the Puerto Rican scholars that are writing about this saying like, oh, it's really racist, but also there's nothing else that even shows Puerto Rican, so at least I have West Side Story, right? It's complicated. Okay. And then in terms of local context, we talked a lot about the local status of immigration and people's relationships to that and how they felt about it. So Kuwaiti scholar Farah Al-Nakib wrote in her book that by 1960s, immigrants had outnumbered local Kuwaitis. And because of that, even though Kuwait has always been culturally diverse, there was a sort of tightening against immigration, or sort of, she writes that so many new people from so many places substantially impacted Kuwaiti's ability and willingness to accommodate, accept, and coexist with strangers. And she cites that some of the stricter citizenship laws come out of this moment. So we talk about the story of immigration in Kuwait. So did I make a not racist West Side Story? What do you guys think?
It was not racist, I guess.
How?
It wasn't racist. It wasn't.
I mean, to begin with, we're all here, like, all of us here are Arabs, and so that already detaches us from the racism and the race issue that was portrayed in the movie. And then you also tackled the colorblind casting, and not just colorblind casting, you just can't make it racist because we're not we're Arabs, so you can't be racist unless there's content in it that targets Arabs, and then you casted us Arabs and made it racist.
Also, because there was already a separation with colors. Like you made the sharks were blue, and the sharks are wearing red, and the jets wearing blue. So that's already a way that you showed the separation without skin color. Because the colors of their costumes made the conflict. Like it was a blue versus red, not necessarily Puerto Rican versus white American.
Do you think that you understood the specific context of the racial histories, though, of West Side Story? Like, yeah?
Yeah.
Did we talk about them enough?
Yeah. Because also their accents, like the way they...
Well, I didn't want accents, actually.
Oh, yeah.
That was something that snuck in. So my two anecdotes I was going to share with this is, so in the film they have these accents, right? And I did not want accents. First of all, I'm not an accent coach, and second of all, that's when we veer into stereotype, right? So it was like, let's just have these two groups. One's are the sharks and one is the jets, and everyone has their own accent. You know, we're not pretending we're somewhere else. And they kept coming in with accents, some of them. Some of them kept coming in with accents, and they got worse and worse and worse. And I was like, you cannot do the accent. It's a stereotype. And the person goes, we're all brown. What does it matter? And I was like, it matters, right? Like there is a difference. We're trying to be specific. So that was the day that I felt like I had failed. But the day I had felt like was a win was KTV2 came to film our show, and they were going to do a little blurb about it on opening night. So during this song in America, the men and women danced on stage together, and all of a sudden the cameraman is just like looking at the orchestra. They're dancing up there, and he's panning to the right. And so we asked what happened, and basically he was there. I didn't speak to him directly. My understanding was that they didn't want the men and women dancing on stage together. And so, we wanted the publicity, so I was like, all right, little anti-feminist moment here. I was like, guys, just do it, girls, go off the side. I know. They refused, though. The men refused. They said, no way, we're not doing it without the girls. They've been working as hard as us, we won't do it. And I feel like, in some ways, that maybe understanding the conversations we had around immigration and difference helped that moment. I still had to talk them out of it and said, I'm really proud of you, but you're gonna do it anyway, because we need the video. But I feel like that's a sort of growth that comes out of doing productions that approach difference. So I don't know. Any final thoughts on West Side Story, y'all?
Did they even have the video, KTV?
I've never seen it, so I don't know whatever. I don't know. We were in rehearsal, so I don't know whether it aired or not. All right. So the next show we did was called The Love for Three Oranges. And this was a Commedia dell'arte piece. And for those of you who don't know, Commedia dell'arte is a form of Italian Renaissance street theater that was really heavily improvised. And my goals with this were to pick a play that allowed students to add their own context. So make their own jokes, make their own references, improvise to their heart's content. Some of the challenges I faced, though, were that some performers wanted a script. They didn't want to improvise. And the characters that were codified in Commedia were very much from that Italian tradition. So maybe didn't speak to 2,000-something students here in Kuwait. So what do you think? Well, how was this show? I have more for the other shows, but do you think this show, what did doing this show in Kuwait help us understand? Was the improvisation helpful?
It was really good. It was so good. When I went to one of the shows, it was so funny, and I realized that the actors were improvising. It was really funny, and I liked that aspect of it.
It felt local?
Yeah.
Okay.
It felt good.
Yeah. Every show had like different jokes. I attended to like 4 shows. I loved how the cast had this chemistry of just understanding where each one would go and where each one would say. It was just different each time, and they were funny, equally funny as they were. And you'd have like this also, like the jokes had the part of localization of the understanding of jokes, of how AUK students come to like joke around out of like the context of the plays. We'd see that in the show, so that was interesting to watch.
Awesome. Yeah, any?
Some of the improv was Arabic. You know, I remember one of the scenes, Ali had a joke about McDonald's or something. I remember it was one of the shows.
I actually was watching the video trying to find, because it was about the Gulf Road McDonald's, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and then there was something about a shoe, stepping on the shoe.
Right,
Yeah, some of the jokes,
right.
even like the Arabic language started by the end. So this show, I felt like at the beginning, the first shows, they were sort of, you guys were sort of hesitant to improvise, but by the last one, there was just like jokes I had never heard before. Yeah.
Yeah, once the actors realized that the Arabic jokes were actually getting reactions from the crowd, that's when we started doing Arabic jokes even more. So,
Also, I feel like it's related to our Kuwaiti theater because it's heavily based on improvisation than scripted, and people love like actors improvising or like saying something that's not in the script. So it has a local sense to it.
Mm-hmm. So not even just the jokes were local. And they were local in the sense that there were jokes in Arabic, there were jokes about Kuwait, there were jokes about AUK even, right? Yeah, jokes.
If anything, I feel like improvisation helps the audience connect or relate more to the characters, even if the joke has nothing to do with the context of the play itself. And so by having them improvise and make their jokes local and about Kuwait and whatnot, you made the audience connect more and like more intrigued to keep seeing what's gonna happen.
Awesome. Good job then, huh? You did a good job. Great. Any other thoughts about that play?
I think this was the first play we fought against the system, like AUK was.
How did we fight against the system
I
in
don't
this
know,
play?
I think one of the jokes we said was AUK production because we had no budget.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. There was this whole budget joke,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh, we had a budget witch, we had a budget, we had more budget, right? So this was us subverting a little bit the resources we had. All right. So Greece. So the goal with Greece was to produce a play that students knew and loved. So very early on, I realized I would have student buy-in on this play. And the challenge was producing a play that students knew and loved. It was the same, the goal and the challenge were the same. Because everyone wanted this to be exactly like the movie as much as possible. Not everyone, but a large contingent wanted the show to be reflective of the movie as much as possible. And this is not something that's just here in Kuwait. I don't say like, oh, you know, this happens with Greece everywhere, right? The movie is so iconic. How do you produce it without at least paying homage to this piece of pop culture iconography, right? So basically what I did with this one was I gave in. And we did a lot of things directly from the movie. And it was a lesson for me though, because it really, through the same thing happened in West Side Story with the accents and wanting to copy some of the choreography. And it made me understand that live performance becomes a way to connect to a global mediascape. So what do I mean by that? Is that we're all inundated by global media at all times of the day with our phones, with our TVs. We're all seeing the same media. We all have access to the same media. And through theater, actors connect to their mediascape. And this was something that it took me a while to learn. So using Amy Cook's idea that the production, this is talking about the Worcester Group's Hamlet, in which there was a live performance in front of an old screen performance. Or for those of you who've seen Rocky Horror Picture Show, it's the same thing, right? It's a live performance in front of a screen performance. It's a copycat. That it's not an attempt to look backwards, or it's not an attempt to recreate. It's about making us through the live performance. So making our connections to our media through live performance. And that's where I think this impulse for copycatting comes in, because we have strong, effective, and emotional ties to the media that we watch. And if we have the ability to make ourselves in their copy, it feels like a homecoming, I think. And so that's what this is. Right? It's not just wanting to copy the movie or not being creative. It's about wanting to feel a part of the things that we watch day in and day out. And we do that through our physical manifestation of it. So in terms of localizing this, I didn't. We didn't really. But it helped me understand how media affects us and our theatrical traditions, yeah? And then another sort of important thing happens, even when we have these sort of, you know, intellectual goals of localizing things and making them relevant to everyone. But that's me. I'm making fun of myself. But what participation and viewing of theater does, even if it's not our taste in theater, is that it engages. It sort of trains performers and audiences. I'll just read Stacey Wolf rather than paraphrasing, and I don't know why I'm trying to do that. So she writes, she's talking about doing musical theater in girls' summer camps in the US. And they're often thrown together with very little budget in 2 weeks. And she said, you know, even if the final results are not necessarily new or are thrown together, what happens is that participation in theater as both performers and audiences shapes them as engaged and knowledgeable spectators and fans and possibly artists who often go on to attend and support professional theater. Okay, so Greece might not be your cup of tea, but you saw it, you were in it, now you're gonna go again to see another show. And maybe you'll appreciate that show differently. Or maybe you're gonna go, you know what? I really liked costume and set design. Maybe I'm gonna start thinking about that, right? So there's ways in which that theater going or participating can beget itself, yeah? All right, any thoughts about Greece? Yeah. Yeah.
I think the adaptation wasn't localizing it, but more like because everyone was used to the movie being a bit more mature than the script, because when we actually had the read-through, everyone realized it was a bit too tame compared to the movie, and the lyrics were different. They weren't as mature in the sense of like the context of the lyrics and stuff. So I guess that was the thing that they had to get used to adapting. So like the mature movie that they were used to compared to the tame script.
Yeah, that's true. That is one way in which we localized it, is that we used the school version, which cut out many references to the sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
And the choreography.
And the choreography, that's true. There were some specific moves from the film that we chose not to do on the stage, yeah? I think you can all imagine it. If you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, Mike?
I feel like a very big part of localization in Greece, especially in Greece, was the prop design, everything in the back. And it just kind of like shows you how the actual movie Grease, you could see the car and everything, Grease Lightning. And then when you go and see the one we had, it was just like this big mess of a sponge that's just
really
very bright red.
Don't forget the Kuwaiti license plate.
Yeah, well, I was actually thinking the Kuwaiti license plate was the part that was local.
But yeah, it kind of shows you how each kind of a theatric play, wherever it is, they would have their own kind of prop that they can actually access. And ours was just very Kuwaiti-esque, where it's just kind of lazy, but it gets to the point and you can see it's there.
Yeah, that's a very materialist take of this, right? Looking at the sort of production capabilities based on local context. Marks would be proud, yeah.
There was also, it wasn't a major difference, but there was also this one line where it was like, oh, you went all the way to Egypt to get a date, but then it didn't make sense because we were in Kuwait, so you changed that one.
That's right, because it was like you went,
Yeah.
what did we change it to?
China.
China? Okay, yeah, that's right. We had to change it, we're like, Egypt is close, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Any other, yeah, Joe?
My question is when we cut out things or try to go for the school version, isn't that us sort of localizing it in a sense of fitting local, like Kuwait's rules and whatnot?
Definitely, yeah, and I think that I missed that point and I took that from Nora and from you. It is a way that we did localize it because we were trying to honor, we had a lot of discussions around what would be appropriate and what would not, right? Because the whole Rizzo's pregnancy line. I remember us spending a whole rehearsal being like, okay, everyone knows she was pregnant, right? There was a pregnancy scare, right? Which implies she had premarital sex, right? So how do we deal with this? It's in the movie, it was cut out of the script. But we wanted her to sing There Are Worse Things I Could Do. So how do we do that? Okay, so let's put it in but imply it. And there was a whole hour-long discussion of exactly how carefully we could imply it without saying it, right? And then the song would still make sense. And it went okay, I think.
Yeah.
But it just took a lot of talking. And I feel like every performance that we've done, there's a lot of talking around the cultural context, what people are comfortable with, what you as actors are comfortable with, and then what the audiences might be comfortable with. And then an awareness that we're gonna push some boundaries in some ways, and definitely not if an actor is not comfortable with it. I mean, that's kind of my rule as a director is you all have to be okay with what we're doing before the audience, yeah? Any other thoughts on Grease? No? Okay, so then we did The Seagull by Anton Chekhov. Nice family portrait there. So some of my goals, and this, as I started in a kind of overarching sense, was to pick different things. I wanted to pick different styles, so Western theater wasn't seen as this monumental singular thing, but was rather composite and had a lot of different forms embedded in it. So I wanted to do a period piece of a different world and time. I wanted a way to build ensemble, and the students had wanted a drama. Everyone's like, we don't want comedy, we're done with all these comedies, let's do a drama. So immediately when you think drama, you think sad, you think Chekhov, right? I think some of the connections were the lack of connections to Russian context, the length of monologues, and Chekhov can just be a little boring. I think I love how boring Chekhov is, but it can be hard, yeah? And so some of the things, oh, I forgot the slide, shoot. So some of the ways I approached this was by going to Stanislavski himself. So as many of you know, Stanislavski is the father of modern acting, is sort of the father of all kinds of acting we see in Western media these days. And he was actually the first director of all of Chekhov's plays. So a lot of his ideas of what realism means comes from his work on Chekhov. So I read An Actor Prepares along with during the rehearsal process to influence my decisions. And And one of the two things that he said that really stuck with me were in page 33 of An Actor Prepares. He says, at the end of discussion, the director announced that tomorrow, in addition to our work with him, we are to begin regular activities that have the purpose of developing our voices and bodies. Lessons in singing, gymnastics, dancing, and acting. These classes will be held daily because of the development of the muscles of the human body require systematic and thorough exercise and a long time. So I wanted us to form an ensemble, and I wanted us to be tired so we could reach certain levels of emotion. And so what we did was we ran together. We literally ran together on the corniche 3 days a week. And I forgot the, let's see, I don't know if I can find it. I downloaded some photos of the sweaty selfies. Right? So like every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, right? Every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, we ran together. We ran and trained our bodies and built an ensemble. Okay? Okay, and then the other thing is he really did in An Actor's Handbook talks about how theater is a collective, it's a collaboration, it is about the ensemble. So in addition to using to thinking about training the human body as a way to build ensemble as well as an actor's tool, thinking about collaboration. So collective creative effort is the root of our kind of art, is what he writes, that requires ensemble acting. And whoever mars that ensemble is committing a crime not only against his comrades, but also against the very art of which he is the servant, right? So really worked on creating an ensemble for this piece. And I think what a lot of our plays have done, and what I was aiming for with the Seagull, is what my colleague Catherine Hennessy calls the new local. And she says that the practice of theater in the region creates and stages micro-communities defined by inclusivity, openness, and egalitarian treatment of their members, regardless of gender, ethnicity, creed, or nationality. And that as such, these micro-communities stand in stark contrast to the insular sub-community established in by other strata of Gulf society. The theater company's work challenges extant hierarchies of inclusion and patterns of segregation and marginalization by uniting practitioners of vastly disparate identities in the collective aim and collaborative process of performance. So the idea that theater brings people together in a new and different way than almost anywhere else in society. And this is what she's found based on her work on Shakespeare performance on the Arabian Nights. And I think that we did find that in the Seagull. So, actors, what do you think? What happened in the Seagull?
A lot of crying.
We cried. We cried a lot. That's true.
It broke me.
Okay. Yeah, it was a hard play, right?
It was also the first time we did a round, and it was quite.
Yeah, we staged it in the round. So anyone who saw it, the audience was actually it was more of a thrust, so on 3 sides. Yeah.
I think it was one of the most challenging things an actor could do, with previous works such as Grease and Three Oranges. This was the most challenging thing to do because we really took it to heart to become our characters in order to make this work. And at some points, I feel like some people, or I speak personally, some people can get confused with their own feelings, confusing them with their characters' feelings, and vice versa. You put yourself, you put some of yourself in the character, and then some of the character in yourself, and it starts to get confusing. That was the most challenging thing to do as an actor, to detach but still make it seem like you are in unison with your character.
Rama, do you have something to add? You raised your hand.
I feel like was one of these plays where you read the script and then you're like, what the hell is going on? And who's that? What is this? And then day by day, you start to understand the play more. And what I realized is that with other plays, you do need a connection with you and the character and also the person you're acting with. But with the Seagull, it was like you needed to dig deep. You had to feel things you didn't want to feel. It triggered so many things. And you were like, it just felt like, wow, I didn't know I had so much like rage or anger or emotions in me. And you had to get really deep with your character too. And not only your character, but the person you're acting with. Like, for example, whether it was with Fahad or Ali, I needed a soft side with Ali, but for example, with Fahad, I had to like cut this feeling off and I had to be like a big, you know? So it was like very hard having to go back and forth with emotions because it wasn't like any other play where you could just like kick it off with the character. You had to like dig deep, and this was the challenging part.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I think that came from the Stanislavski process, but you were able to do that because of some of the ensemble we built. That was my hope in that. Do you have a
To add on to Alma's observation, you were also, like, you needed to be willing to show those emotions, you know? Like, you have to dig them out, then you gotta be, like, open enough to show them. And that was a big challenge for me on this play. At first, I wasn't willing, and I don't think I ever was in the end. This, you know, like, we got there.
Especially the ritual in Yun.
Yeah.
In the ritual in Yun. That was also a very hard part of the whole audition process, or like the rehearsal process. Is the ritual in Yun to that, you know, that deep emotional side of it.
Yeah, what he's talking about is I kind of knew that the Stanislavski exploration might be kind of difficult and bring up stuff. So I wanted very clear boundaries of when we entered the character and when we stepped out of the character. And so I talked to this guy who has done a lot of theater and a lot of experimental theater, Carlos Uriona, and asked him for a suggestion, like how do we mark the boundary of the actor and the character? And he suggested coming up with a sort of ritual where people brought in a pose that made them feel comfortable, and then we each did it with for 3 breaths to enter the space, and then to exit the space, we did the same thing. We all did each other's poses again, whoever was in the room, and then we added music as a way too. So any music that made them feel sad or made them feel in character, we put on during the opening ritual, and then happy music to bring them out of it while doing the same poses. And like about half the time, that end turned into a dance party. I think, for at least for a couple minutes, where they wanted to dance out these sad Russian characters, you know, like get them out of their skin. But then just to clarify what he meant. It wasn't necessarily easy always, ritualing in or ritualing out. Okay. So, last but not least, let's talk about the insanity of 1808, which was just wrapped like a week ago, right? Has it been a week? A little bit. Okay, so the insanity of 1808. Is this a play anyone's ever heard of? No? Might there be a reason why you haven't heard of it? Yes. Well, hold on. Let's talk about my goals first. The reason is because I wanted to diversify the type of acting style. So this is kind of Brechtian. This is not realistic. This is over the top. It's immersive theater, right? It's giving the actors intellectual dialogue to chew on, right? It's not in normal day speech. It's very much elevated. Challenges. I think that I would have loved to have a dramaturg that told us all about the French Revolution whenever I needed to ask a question. I didn't have that, so we were like, who's this? Okay, it was a little bit like that. And the biggest challenge was, so this is actually a play, a very famous play, called The Persecution and Assassination of Jean-Paul Marat, as performed by the inmates of the Asylum of Charenton under the direction of the Marquis de Sade. This is the play that we had originally set out to do. Have you heard of this play?
Yes.
Yes. It was written in '62. It's been done all over the world. It kind of changed the theater world. So Jean-Paul Marat was a French revolutionary figure, and the Marquis de Sade was a philosopher who was in the French Revolution, but had a complicated relationship with the revolutionaries. Is most well known for his writings on sadism, which is named after him. So we put this poster forward, designed by one of my colleagues, and the play, this is a picture of the actor getting whipped by another actor, and the play was banned due to the nature of the individual. So we were not able, so about 3 weeks before the show opened, we were told we were not allowed to do this play because of the nature of the individual. The play itself, I would argue, is pretty tame. There is not much in there that is to be banned or to be censored. So we changed some names and we changed some words, and we did The Insanity of 1808, a play within a play about the French Revolution. And that was the play we did. And the characters we had were Jean-Paul Marat and the Marquis de Sade. Okay? This is in the play. This is Jean-Paul Marat, and this is actually Jean-Paul Marat, a painting by David. And in the play, it says that the Dutch scene should look like this. The other thing that we did in addition to changing names is there were certain things we censored. Some because we felt like they wouldn't pass muster in terms of cuss words or discussing a woman's body, and also some just for actors' comfort. But because this play itself is about censorship and what's okay in a revolutionary society and what can change, we decided to mark those moments with the character actually holding up a censored sign. So anything that was censored by us for our community was marked with a censored sign. Other than that, we did the play as written, other than the title. And a part of what I was trying to do with this play is thinking about audiences, and at this point, this is my last play in the 2.5 years I've been here, and we have developed an acting troupe and an audience that was coming in, and I wanted us to think about theater a little bit differently. So this is a quote from Peter Brook, who is the original director, and he quotes Jean-Paul Marat's line from the play: "The important thing is to pull yourself up by your own hair, to turn yourself inside out and see the whole world with fresh eyes." And he writes, how? Someone is bound to ask. Weiss, the playwright, wisely refuses to tell. He forces us to relate opposites and face contradictions. He leaves us raw. He searches for meaning instead of defining one, and puts the responsibility of finding the answers back on where it properly belongs, off the dramatist and onto ourselves, right? So I wanted the audience to leave thinking about change and society and individual without having any clear answers. So, insanity. Any reflections from the actors on this play? Yes. Hassan, who played the Marquis de Sade.
It was very challenging in a sense. As you said, it's not based on like realistic acting, but more of over the top. So like in my conversations with Marat, it's not normal for me to lecture him for 5 minutes and then he lectures me for another 5 minutes. So I found it like really difficult. And that's how it is. Like, cause like normally we speak for like 4 pages and then he replies for another 4 pages. It's just it was hard.
In terms of action,
Paul Marat.
yeah, right. In terms of acting style, it's pretty difficult because there's a fine line between like overacting. You don't know if you're overacting or not, really. So we just needed to put trust in you and trust in the director and the assistant director as well. And yeah, it was pretty difficult. That was probably the biggest challenge of this play. It wasn't realistic.
More on what Fed said. we weren't just playing a character, we were playing a patient playing a character. So at all times we had to be aware of this distinction of we're not just acting as the character that Saad wrote, but we were also acting as the patient who wants to be that actor. So we had to have this dichotomy of who's the patient, who's the character, how do we change ourselves, and then my favorite part is when we just break character with the audience. So there's like 3 people on that stage of who you are. And it was just interesting playing around those 3 different personalities and seeing which one comes out in which scene or in which line. Because sometimes you relate to the patient, but sometimes you relate to the character as well. And where do you stand and towards which character? It's interesting playing that role as well.
To comment on both Corday and Maga.
As one of the vocalists.
It was very, I think what he said it was hard not to overact. It was also hard to overact as a vocalist that was putting on this clownish behavior. It was difficult to know what is okay with overacting, and you would constantly say, whatever you do is good. We need you to overact. But it was hard because we're so used to a director and a script directing us into being tame, and then this just put it in, it said, no, you're not doing that, you're doing this. And then B, playing a patient that is a recovering alcoholic, that is supposed to be quite slow and whatnot, it was hard to be a clown that needs to overact with dramatic gestures and then be a patient that is very slow and very, not in it. So that was, so just comment on both.
Just as a sort of layering became challenging in certain aspects.
I like how a lot of people told me that the play was political, and they kind of found they kind of related to the censorship as well, because we don't kind of have a revolution here in Kuwait, but we do have the censorship thing going on, especially even in common media like cinemas and comics and any kind of media that.
When I banned book.
Yeah, basically right across the building. But I had a friend come watch this, and he's a bit into philosophy, and he told me, he's like, it got a bit more political towards the end, but I would have hoped that there was a bit more philosophy in it. But then I argued that with this quote as well, there is philosophy in the script, maybe you just don't see it with all the theatrics going on, but it does have philosophy in it as well, especially the conversations between Mara and Saad. So I mean, it's over now. We don't have to. But yeah, I like that it does talk about these things, even if it happened back in the French Revolution or in '62, but it's still common now, and it's nice that we kind of brought it up, especially here.
That was a part of my intent. Yeah, exactly.
And it made me think about a lot of things in our world, especially what really is the point of a revolution and what's everyone trying to achieve. And there was this one line that stuck with me that was creating a revolution wasn't it was a step in the right direction, but the way that they approached the revolution was wrong, and you need to have a correct method in approaching things. And that was really, because it's sometimes with certain things and certain events we do need a revolution, but not in there are correct ways of doing things and then wrong ways of doing things, even if it is the right thing to do. So I applied that. I thought it made sense, and I could relate it to a lot of things in our real world.
Something that really frustrated me about the audience is that not as a general audience, they missed most of the philosophical things in the play. And I wish that they could understand it more of how, not just political it was, but how the script itself, the dialogue, they were layered into so many different analysis into them that most of the audience, they missed it. They missed it also, maybe because they were distracted by what the patients were doing, maybe because of the whole theatrical aspect of it. But the dialogue itself was important that they should have caught, but not most people did. And that was just something that frustrated me personally.
Well, that's every theater maker's dream. You want the audience to know exactly what you're thinking, and they never do, right? Any artist, really. You're like, this is what and then, then you put it out there and hope for the best, yeah? Mike,
I don't know if it's different being backstage to being an audience member, but I know that there's a lot of bits in the actual play that made me feel weird inside out. Just to think of them as a Middle Eastern. One of the big things I had to keep asking myself is, why are we in a society where we have to censor language, but it's okay for us to see someone getting whipped, for example? It just resonates something that's off a little bit, and it made me think about where I am and how it fits into a theater.
Yeah, what's censored? I mean, the same thing you could say for the movie censorship here, right? Is what's censored and what's not. You know, their violence, and that, I mean, I would say that that's the same in the U.S. in my context. Usually, you can get away with a lot of violent things, but anything that's sexual in nature gets sort of tamped down much earlier in the process. Yeah.
Especially about like to add on to what Rafal was saying, because apparently some people were, like, came up to the actors and they were like, they didn't understand anything about the play, like, literally nothing about the play. They were very confused when they walked out. But I feel like that's one of the challenges, especially in the Middle East, when we do plays like these. It's like it's very hard to try to give a meaning towards it. If it's not a comedy, then they won't understand what's going on. You know, it has to be something that's a comedy for them to understand, especially over here in Kuwait.
Well, yeah, I mean, most of the theater here is comedic, but I think that
all of it.
all of it, yeah.
Family and comedy, family and comedy. So
Yeah.
for kids, and then the comedies, the rest of it. So,
Yeah, but I think that that's an indictment. I mean, you sound very much like the Birmingham School of Philosophers in the middle of the century, that entertainment is this sort of entertaining thing, and if it challenges you at all, people don't want to see it, you know? So it's a matter of, I think what this play does, interestingly though, we talked about this, is it's very spectacular. You do have things that are entertaining along with the philosophical. You have people freaking out and doing flips and singing songs, and then like a lecture on the French Revolution. So, you know, it kind of forces you to sit with the intellectual part, even if that's not why people aren't seeing it or enjoying it. Yeah. All right, I'm going to say that overall, I think looking at the kinds of work that we do and trying to localize them helps us understand the diversity of Western theatrical tradition, and that's, I try to always promote different styles and different genres and different authors and different locations, just to not see it as one style, right? We had discussions on how Western theater took from diverse traditions. This challenges the sort of authenticity of Western form, meaning that it's not this original thing, it already is intercultural as we understand it, and that theater history has more voices than we could ever hope to capture in a textbook. And then it was, as I said, what I learned is that, you know, more and more our media, both currently and historically, is global now. It doesn't belong to a location. So Broadway is no longer produced on Broadway. Hollywood is no longer attached to Hollywood. We all own these traditions increasingly. And there's just challenges that I sound like every sort of bitter old theater director, is the lack of budget, manpower, and time to do things appropriately. But also, really, I wouldn't even say this is a challenge, just sort of being attuned to the different needs in the room of the actors as well as the audiences, and always trying to walk that fine line of respecting the culture in which I'm working, but also maybe pushing boundaries, artistic boundaries, and you know, sometimes those were more successful than others. So yeah, thank you. This is my email if anyone wants to talk, but I think we have time for questions.
Okay, it's time for a Q&A. So if you have any questions.
I think that one.
Yeah, just say it.
Yeah. Okay.
Would it be possible, like, turn on lights everywhere? So,
House lights.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it cares here all, you know, how loud I am, so it doesn't need a mic. I probably don't do it myself. So anyway, I have something to say. It's probably a lot of things, but I'm just gonna ask this question in the space too, maybe the rest. I could definitely adapt to be back to all the all the different plays that been done, throughout the UK. I've pretty much watched all of them, maybe the last one I did, unfortunately. And you mentioned something interesting about Seagull, which is the lack of knowledge regarding the Russian literature, the culturalization itself within the play. And I watched Seagull myself, and it was one of the very, very different plays and portrayals than the rest of the things. And even back in Kathy Dawn's days, they did not really focus on a lot of drama. And it's interesting because you were mentioning every challenge you had in the plays, and you said the lack of knowledge kind of was a challenge for you. And I love the Seagull, and I thought, saying that you guys are good actors yourself, I've seen multiple shows that you've done, and I think one of the things that maybe does not give the actor background about what they're doing kind of lets them fully put the focus on how am I going to portray this character, which is like maybe the opposite of Grease, where everyone had a background idea of, okay, what is going to be said, how is the character going to portray, the characterization, self-fashioning, and all that. So my question is, to what extent would this challenge be something that maybe pushes the actor, this is a question for everyone who participated, pushes the actor to, kind of put something from your own background of just being an actor versus a actor versus spectator when you have more knowledge or background about the production itself? I'm gonna leave the rest of my questions after I give space for everyone else. So maybe, yeah.
Well, first of all, I love that question, how to take a challenge and turn it into an opportunity, right? So this idea of like, okay, we don't all know what it was like to live in a country estate in the 1900s Russia, but then what can we put into it? And we did actually talk about what kinds of divine, like what would be the equivalent of divine country boredom here, and the sort of like the summers or the camping, right? So we sort of talked about what that would have been like in this milieu, right? But I don't know, let's hear from actors. Did that free you in terms of adding more of yourself to the role? Or yeah?
I had that challenge and I came up to you and I didn't know how to.
Okay, own it. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know like how to portray Corday in the sense of where the patient is also sick or suffers from sleep sickness and melancholia. So how could I be Charlotte Corday with that illness? And you told me like, do I research more about it? Do I see who Charlotte Corday is? But you told me to have my own sense of who I think Charlotte Corday could be in that play, so that it's not an adaptation of the movie, it's not an adaptation of anyone or even the real Charlotte Corday, it's how I see Charlotte Corday and how I want to bring her to that show. So that was one of the challenges, because I was trying to see, okay, what do I see in Charlotte Corday that I could bring out that's different than who has presented Charlotte Corday in the past. So that was a challenge for me, doing it. And I think I did an okay job of trying to bring a different type of Charlotte Corday. More, yes, thank you.
Well,
And this is not necessarily Seagull I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But to like stress on Seagull, well, it's every like actor's mission, I suppose, to want to portray the best version of the character that they're playing, and to just do them justice based on the script and the staging within the script. But with Seagull, like, we brought more of ourselves in it, in the sense that when we ritualed in, we knew that this was just the character. But before ritualing in, you knew that you had a lot of, like, how do I say this? You had a lot of thoughts about your character. You don't necessarily have to know or have this Russian background to understand the emotionality of this character. Perhaps maybe you need it in order to understand the setting that you're in, or certain characteristics or motives that the character would have. But most of it was just you having that emotionality within yourself. And having the connection with other people. I remember telling some people, the moment we ritual in and we are our characters, we are not going to speak with each other, because I want to 100% convey this character's pain. And the moment we ritual out, that is when we are able to like talk with each other as if nothing ever happened. So in a way, you have to bring yourself, bring your own personality within the character that you're portraying within, Seagull, specifically. But at the same time, you also need to know not to be yourself in order to portray this character's emotionality.
So, okay. You talked about how the theater is in the Middle East, the Western theater is, but what about if it's the other way around? You being someone who's very well known for Western theater, what have you, did teaching it in the Middle East change any aspects of it that you thought?
Yeah, I mean, I always cite this example. Like, it makes me reconsider the boundaries of what I presumed are like, everyone comes in with own cultural assumptions. And I maybe not fair to ask me this totally because my dad is from Iran originally, so Middle Eastern culture, sort of in a broad stroke, is not completely unfamiliar to me. Granted, I'd never stepped foot in the Middle East prior to taking this job here. But of course it made me sort of question, there are always things that surprised me. And the story I like to tell is when I was teaching the theater appreciation class, we were doing a Roman comedy, and there's a character in there that's a prostitute. But I went through and I censored it and took out every reference to her being a prostitute, right? So it just seemed like she was a girlfriend. And then I had a student, ask, well, why does he have another girlfriend when he could just also marry her? And then the other student was like, because it was a different context, right? So before I even had to answer, there was this whole discussion about different cultural contexts. And I just found that so fascinating because I didn't even have to say a word, and there was like this really rich debate on how cultures are different and how our assumptions play into things, right? So I guess what I'd like to hope is that I came in with open ears and an open heart and sort of let you all guide the work that I did. Going forward, have more interest in understanding theatrical history from a global perspective, because I just feel like in a lot of ways I've really been shortchanged from having a Western-dominated education. That's my answer.
Any more questions?
So I don't know how much of Arab plays you knew before coming to Kuwait. I don't think this is on.
It is.
But is it?
Yes.
Okay. So, but when you came to Kuwait and with the Western theater you had in mind, what surprised you the most about Arab plays?
Well, I had never seen them. The ones that I had read, and I read a bunch before I came here. But those tended to be the more literary ones that crossed over. So what surprised me most is how vibrant the theater scene is here, and how commercial it is, and how it's everywhere, and it's sold out, and there's a lot of it, and that's something I'd never even heard of, right? You get these sort of plays that are really famous, that are crossover, that you read, The King's Elephant by Saad al-Wanus, which is the Syrian play about the revolution, and we get sort of the highlights, and I just want to know more, I guess, and I'm really fascinated. And we started all going to theater, and I'm so fascinated by this commercial popular stuff that I want to keep going to it. Yeah. So that, I guess, how we don't learn about it. We don't learn about the performing traditions at all. Even in a global textbook, I mean, they do sort of touch on Asia, they touch on Africa, and there's a paragraph about the Middle East. Honestly, it's pretty bad. In terms of what's available, even when you're in the best institutions that look like my PhD specialized in a global theater education. And so we had someone who was specialist in Africa, someone who was a specialist in Asia, someone who was a specialist in Latin America. So, right? I didn't learn much. Anything we learned was on our own. So that's a part of why I'm wanting to do future work in this world, just because it needs to be known.
So
So I know that you said that like you specialize in Western theater, and it would be like it's not your job to put on a Kuwaiti play or whatnot. But have you, or why didn't you, or will you consider, for example, completely reshaping a Westernized play and making it Arabian, sort of like you know how Sulaiman al-Bassam, he completely like Arabified Shakespearean work, like Richard III, for example, and relate to connotations of things that are happening in Syria and the refugees and whatnot. Have you ever thought of doing something like that, in which you're not really putting on a Kuwaiti play, but you're making it set in the Arab world or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, we've, I don't know, when should we?
It's okay.
It's okay.
Till 9.
Till 9, okay, so you watch the 9. Yeah, I mean, for me, the question would be, so I have a few thoughts on that. I do think that it would maybe help with, localizing the context, right? And I think there's benefits to looking at stories that are presumed universal, like Shakespeare, and setting them in new worlds to give, new reflections on things. That said, I actually talked with Clark about doing that for the Seagull and doing it in this camping and setting it in Kuwait. But you know why I didn't? Because I don't have the time to do it well enough. Because you have to first of all, you have to be a playwright, right? If you're going to change it and adapt it to a local context, you don't want to just change the setting and call it a day. That's lazy, in my opinion. If you're going to change it really truly localize it, which is what Sulaiman al-Bassam and many other, hybrid Arab writers have done, is combine things in a way that is really fruitful to look at. But I didn't have the time to do that here. Secondly, what it also does is, I think it precludes us from doing local writers. So if we're gonna this is not a popular opinion, but if we're gonna put Shakespeare and put it in any context, what we're doing is taking a performance slot away from somebody who's working locally, and that's a problem for me. So rather than do that, I put time into this 48-hour festival to try to develop student playwrights, because that gives you all a voice to, even if it's a 5-10 minute play, you get to write something, and maybe you'll think about playwriting in the future. So that was my thought on it. What I definitely will do is try to take something back when I work in the States and do something set in this world over there as responsibly as I can. I've heard there's a play that's actually set, I don't remember exactly where it's set, but it's a discussion. In the play, it's, they're like, we want to do this Arab play, but we're all white, how do we do it? Is the context of the play. So that way you get around the sort of casting non-Arabs as Arabs, but you're still addressing the aesthetic and political and social considerations of this world. So I do plan to definitely bring that into both my teaching and my directing work as I move forward. Yes?
My brother used to make adaptation of some plays. Well, it was late 60s or beginning 70s. So I don't know if the name in English is The Game of Hazard and Laugh. So he made it لعبة حلوة. It's a nice game. So instead of it's a set-up of getting married. So he changed the context, because here we had the problem of the families categories. If somebody from high family, he wouldn't be married to another girl. So he adapted it in this way, and it was played. And there was another play, I think it was in Spanish, the trees will die standing, something like this. And as Gerald was a soul that of a woman and a family who lost their son. So another guy will come and present himself as a son. So this kind of place, it can be adapted, because there is a human touch in it. So there's no difference between societies, and it's only can adapt to local context by the language. I've been able by the customs or something like this, but the context, I think it's most important that you bring it back to the local stories. So it was done before in the 70s and so on.
I would love to read those if you want to email them to me or we can talk after. That would be great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, and I think it should be done. I think the question is why I didn't do it. And partially because I'm not of the local context is also a part of it, right? I want to be as sort of cognizant of how I belong and how I don't as possible. Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you so much for coming.
Without whose hard work I couldn't have done this and who contributed to the lecture.